Good morning, and thank you for joining us at this early hour. This is the EPP Group's press conference on the future of Europe's industry. As you all know, on Thursday, the European Commission will present its plan how to make Europe more competitive. EPP Group has always wanted that the Green Deal and that strategic industry policy go hand in hand. And to explain you more about this, with me there are two EPP Group speakers. Esther de Lange, the EPP Group's Vice Chairwoman responsible for economy and environment, and Ehler, the EPP Group Spokesman on industry. Before I give them the floor, just one more remark. This meeting is streamed on the EPP Group's YouTube channel, and the journalists are connected remotely, so they will be able to ask questions remotely. With having said this, I give the floor to Esther.
Yes, thank you very much, Marta. And as Marta has already mentioned, from the beginning of the Green Deal proposals of the Commission, the EPP has been keen to underline that a climate policy should go hand in hand with a strategic industrial policy. And of course, in this mandate, we have seen proposals for an industry strategy, but focus has very much been on the Green Deal and Fit for 55 until now, which has been green, but the EPP has not always seen the deal, in the sense that, of course, we want to make sure that there's a place in Europe for this green industry to provide jobs to our citizens. And we have always warned that if the Green Deal doesn't do that, doesn't provide these jobs in Europe, the Green Deal won't work. Now, this week, we will see two pieces of legislation, Marta has mentioned that are badly needed. The Net Zero Industry Act and the Raw Materials Act. I will not give you a long introduction, but I would like to underline that the EPP in the Net Zero Industry Act would like to see in particular the speeding up of planning and permit procedures. This is something we have pushed for a long time. Of course, nobody has seen the final texts yet, but we would be very keen for that to be included. And that would mean also, in particular in small member states, a more pragmatic dealing with protected areas such as Nature 2000. Coming from a small member state, I can tell you, if I have a choice between either protecting a snail that is abundantly available in other Nature 2000 area, or finally getting green hydrogen off the ground to protect our industry and jobs, I would go for the hydrogen project, which are badly needed in Europe. So in short, the proposals that we see move us a bit towards a more strategic approach, less dependence of third countries, which is to be welcomed as a first step, but more is needed. And we in the EPP see these two laws more as a vehicle to speak about overall competitiveness in Europe. And there, I think, I hand over to Ehler, our industry coordinator.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. The European industry is under pressure. This is because of the historic energy prices and inflation. This is because of the increasing global competition and the changing geopolitical climate. And this is also due to the urgent need to invest in the twin transitions. All these are factors we, as policymakers, can react to, but ultimately have no control. What we can control is the amount of pressure we add to this through regulation. A recent survey by the Business Europe found that nearly 60% of businesses in Europe, particularly small business, consider the regulatory environment in Europe to be the second most important disadvantage in international competition. Energy prices was identified by nearly 90% of the businesses as a crucial factor. Recently, a study of PricewaterhouseCoopers found out that the scenario where the EU would ban the sale of internal combustion engine cars by 2035 would cost in Europe nearly 400,000 jobs. 2016, a study estimated that the European chemical industry would face around 14 billion euro in regulatory costs in 2025, and this was without the additional burden created by the Green Deal regulatory agenda. So that is the reality we have to deal with as policymakers when we want to get serious about achieving the 2030 and the 2050 objective, because decarbonization by deindustrialization cannot be the approach. But we are at risk of deindustrialization in Europe, and we should be aware. And that is not discussion which is in favor of 55 or not in favor of 55. That is a discussion how we deliver on the deal part of the Green Deal. And we should be aware that this is not an industry discussion. A recent survey showed that 93% of the Europeans are worried about costs, their jobs, and the economy in general. And I think it's high time. Yesterday we finished the last proposal, which we consider as part of the Fit for 55 deal. That was the building directive. But now is the time to show how we make the deal. And I think the IRA just put a focus on the general challenge we have, and this is competitiveness. We see chances, but we have to deregulate, we have to invest more, we have to invest more in research and in innovation. That is the comparative advantage we have. And what we want to focus, and where we think that the newest proposals, be it the raw materials, be it the reaction to the IRA, is the right step, the right first step in the direction that Europe cares about is competitiveness. Thank you very much.
Thank you to both. Now the time has come for your questions. First, the journalists in the room. Are there any questions here? Alice, Financial Times.
Hi, thank you for the briefing. It's Alice Hancock, Financial Times. I just wondered if you think there should be reconsiderations of already agreed Fit for 55 files in the light of, current considerations about industry, competitive, and so on. As we've seen with the German government's sort of recent stance on combustion engines, and which files in particular you think might be looked at again.
What we want in particular is more coherence and coordination between different files. And that's not only Fit for 55, but it's also the wider, I would say, climate and environmental agenda. If you look at, for example, solar panels, which are included in the Net Zero Industry Act, we currently, at end of life, label them as hazardous waste. Which has its implications and which makes it more difficult to be circular when it comes to solar panels and makes our industry less attractive than industry from third countries. And there are many, many examples where actually existing legislation might be hampering exactly the things that the new pieces of legislation are trying to do. We are happy that the Commission is supposedly proposing a competitiveness check within all new pieces of legislation that the Commission is going to propose. But I would like to go further. I would like there to be some kind of a coordination unit within the European Commission that actually has this overview. Where is existing legislation hampering exactly this more strategic, more circular, more independent approach to our industry in Europe that we badly need? And I mentioned Nature 2000. There will be a huge discussion on planning procedures, which the Commission would like to speed up. The question will be, do we have a blanket exemption to that speeding up in protected areas, like Nature 2000 and other areas, or are we going to be pragmatic and say, if we temporarily need to build in a Nature 2000 area to get a pipeline in the ground, after that, it will be green as before, but to get a pipeline in the ground in order to get our green hydrogen going in Europe, then I believe this is something we need to do. But I can assure you that other groups within this House will see this differently. So,
may I give you a practical example? It's not about 55 or not 55. I think there's the common understanding that we need 55, even in economic terms, because it's opportunity. But we have to have a focus on the regulation machine which is running by the Commission. I give you an example. Just the implementation costs of directives like the corporate due diligence, the implementation costs are estimated by the Commission itself by 1.2 billion, and the annual costs for additional accounting for the European companies, specifically SMEs, is estimated by 3.6 billion euro. Just for one regulation. And I think if you look, for example, for the reporting, the ESG, the environment, social and government reporting duties, there had been a recent study by one of the biggest accounting companies in Europe saying that would alone need an additional 100,000 accountants in the European industry, specifically for small and medium-sized industry. And you can go through the ranks. The Industry Emission Directive. We don't have transition plans for companies. We have done now transition plans for all the plans individually. That quadruples the amount of administrative burden for the industry. And none of that is actually contributing to the 2030 goals. This is simply additional regulation. Some of it is meaningful, but it's nice to have. But we should focus on the 2030 goals. We should focus on the Green Deal. And what we see is the machine running. And the industry is asking for breathing space. The industry is not denying that there is a need for regulation. They simply tell us, let's focus on what we want to achieve and not let the machine run and run and run.
Thank you. I think there are two more questions, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the briefing. Stefano Porcello, MLEX. A few days ago in the ITRE committee, my understanding is that you spoke quite heavily against the definition of green hydrogen put forward by the Commission in a delegated act. So can you please clarify the EPP position? Is that like a personal statement or is that the group position on green hydrogen? And does the EPP want to vote down the definition the Commission has put forward? And secondly, as a second question, if you can please tell us what the EPP thinks of the electricity market reform put forward by the Commission yesterday. Thanks.
In formal terms, the EPP had placed an objection to what had been so far presented as from the Commission. We think that the proposal is over-descriptive, over-complicated, and we hope that there will be additional clarifying as we had been seeing that with the taxonomy and other proposals which had been forward. It's not about blocking, it's not just about a political game. The reaction of the stakeholders is terrifying. It's overcomplicated, and it's hampering the ramp up for the hydrogen production in Europe, and I think we should see a better one. And we are in direct correspondence with the Commission whether we could simplify the proposal which had been brought forward. And the electricity market design, I think there are a lot of favorable things. The PPAs, the over-the-counter trades, I think it is simplifying, gives the companies the needed flexibilities to plan. I think that is, in principle terms, a favorable proposal. But I want to state right now what we are very worried that from the Social Democrats and the Socialist group, their intentions to get the merit order system back into the proposal to get a much more regulated market. We saw that failing on the gas market, and we don't want to have heavy market intervention into the electricity market. I think it even hampers the development of renewable energies in Europe.
Next question.
Bonjour, en français, si vous me permettez. Je voudrais revenir sur la fin de votre intervention, quand vous avez parlé du grand défi qu'est la compétitivité, et vous avez évoqué les propositions sur les matières premières stratégiques et la réaction au texte de l'IRA. Mais vous avez juste évoqué. Donc je voudrais savoir quelle est votre attente sur les propositions de la Commission pour la réaction à l'IRA américain, et quelle est votre analyse du voyage, du déplacement que Mme Ursula von der Leyen vient de faire à Washington et de ses entretiens avec Joe Biden et des annonces qu'elle a faites. Merci.
If you allow me, I will answer in English, but the question was perfectly clear in French. Do we have interpretation?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, perfect. So let me first touch upon the reaction to the IRA, where I believe we touched upon several elements. One issue we didn't touch upon yet, and which is quite fundamental, I think, in the Commission proposals, and is something that, if I know the French discussion a bit, will be something that could be welcomed in France, is the more strategic approach when it comes to procurement. I believe, and I have experienced this also in the Netherlands, where we had a procurement for green public transport, so for electrical buses. The tender was done as it's always done, not only on the basis of financial considerations, but also on sustainability considerations, which you can already do. But in the end, the company that won was a European company that, as it turned out, would be producing all the buses in China, which was not the idea of the local government that did the tender. And I believe that what we will see in the proposals coming from the Commission is a much more strategic approach to procurement, in the sense that elements like dependency on third countries and how much a third country actually controls a certain production and supply chain, if that is very high, you can take that on board in the procurement procedure, which is something we've been pushing for and which is something that I think should be welcomed. Of course, the procedure should remain workable, but an additional weighing factor to bring on board dependencies that we want to avoid as an element to take on board in procurement, I think is a good thing and is a direct reaction, of course, to the IRA that we've seen in the US. Now, on the trip to the United States, where I believe, of course, I haven't had a direct conversation about that with the President of the European Commission. There it's very important that the EU will be treated in a similar way to Canada and Mexico, which means one step up in terms of the treatment of our companies in the context of IRA. Is that enough? No, it's not. We also need to gain transparency into what kind of subsidies are actually being awarded to companies. I believe the Americans have talked with the Europeans about this additional transparency, which will help us to also determine where our state aid and our aid programs, whether that is national or European, need to go. You first need to have insight in what the Americans do, how they treat certain companies in order to be able to react. So those are two very important elements, I think, procurement as well as the transparency, and the third, of course, the equal treatment to Canada and Mexico within the context of the IRA.
May I just add, I mean, what is a little bit falling from the table is, in principle, we have any economic interest to welcome what the Americans are doing. It's the first of our, let's say, competitors who is buying into the CO2 reduction strategy. So if the United States and other places in the world are not buying in, maybe they're reacting to stipulate the same effect in a different way. The European competitiveness is under threat. Our energy prices will stay high. The ambitions are going to cost. And so in principle terms for our competitiveness, it's a very positive signal that the Americans had buying into the first of our competitors buying into the CO2 reduction agenda. But it puts a focus on the question, what is the challenge in Europe? And that's competitiveness. So we are asking the Americans in a way to negotiate an IRA which is stipulating heavily the competitiveness of the American industry. And I think the reaction can't be that we water down the American initiative. The initiative must be that we strengthen the competitiveness in Europe. And that we shouldn't forget, because we are living in deeply integrated market. And procurement is a delicate thing, because on microchips, on the strategic supply chain, we heavily depend both sides on a deeply integrated market. So there are limits to that kind of game we can show. I mean, you can have a smarter procurement, yes, but let's be realistic. It's a deeply integrated market. We are no longer in the 19th century. There is no national economy in the United States and Europe. These are the most integrated markets on the global market. Thank you.
Let's see if there are other questions in the room. I don't see any hands. Online, there are also no hands raised. And if this is the case, I therefore thank you for being here. And of course, you are invited to reach out to us if you have any further questions. Thank you.